Hello, and welcome to the Cognitive Edge, where educators, librarians, technology professionals, and community leaders come together to examine ideas that are shaping education, information, and the future of learning. I am Dr. Daniel Sabol, and today I want to discuss a profession that nearly everyone recognizes, but few people fully understand, and that is librarianship, my favorite area. You ask someone to describe the skills of a librarian, and you may hear familiar answers. A librarian must know books, and a librarian probably should be organized, and um, a librarian must know where information is located. Um, those answers are um, not necessarily wrong, but they're just not complete. Um, the contemporary librarian is not merely responsible for placing books on shelves or telling patrons where to find mystery section. Today's librarian may be an educator, a researcher, a technology trainer, an archivist, a database manager, a program developer, a digital literacy specialist, a community partner, an instructional designer, and defender of intellectual freedom, sometimes before lunch. A recent resume.co article identified 14 important librarian skills divided between 7 technical skills and 7 interpersonal skills. The technical skills included cataloging, archival management, database management, documentation, computer proficiency, research, and teaching. The interpersonal skill included communication, organization, attention to detail, customer service, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. That is definitely a strong starting point. But today I want to go a little deeper. Rather than simply listing these skills, let's really examine why they matter, how they appear in actual library work, and what they tell us about the future of the profession. So, the myth of the quiet librarian. Um, let's begin with one of the most persistent stereotypes surrounding librarianship is that many people still imagine a librarian as someone who is quiet and sits meek at a desk and checks books out and occasionally asks visitors um, to lower their voices. But modern librarianship is not a passive occupation anymore. We are very active in our services, and the profession that's really built around people, um, information, technology, education, and problem solving. So we hold um, a string in many different areas. Um, a librarian, may begin the day helping a student locate scholarly sources for a research assignment. 10 minutes later, that same librarian may be helping an older adult apply for a government benefit online. After that, librarians may teach a class on evaluating website troubleshooting, or evaluating databases and logging into them to make sure everything's working correctly, to really review a budget, plan a community program, answer complicated reference questions sometimes, and assist someone who has never used a computer. Um, that's what's happening. And that's not quiet work. That's complex, intellectual, technical, and emotional work. The librarian must move between systems and subject age groups and levels of understanding. Uh, our librarians must recognize what someone needs, even when that person cannot clearly explain the need. Um, this is really why librarianship requires both hard skills and soft skills. Technical knowledge without human understanding is not enough. At the same time, friendliness without professional knowledge is just not enough. Um, the modern librarian needs both. Um, so, skill one, cataloging and classification. Um, this is probably one of the most in-demand skill or technical skill is cataloging and classification. Um, it's not easy. It's a job of its own. Um, to someone outside of the profession, cataloging may sound like data entry, when in reality, cataloging is about intellectual access, a resource that cannot be discovered might as well not exist. Um, Cataloging describes an item, classification, place uh, that item within a meaningful structure. So, subject headings, they give you names and format and edition and publication information and relationship building resources all help users locate what they need. The resume.co article reference systems and standards such as the DESME dual classification, the Library of Congress classification, the resource description and access, and the Anglo-American cataloging rules. But cataloging is not only about following rules, it requires judgment. Um, a cataloger must ask, how will people search for this particular item and which subjects best represent its content? What language should be used to describe it? How should a digital object be connected to related resources? These decisions, they influence discoverability. And if you pick the wrong keywords, you may put it in a place that it may never get discovered. In a school library, accurate cataloging helps students really locate books at an appropriate reading or interest level. In an academic library, it supports scholarly research. In a public library, it connects community members with recreational, educational, professional, and cultural materials. Cataloging is therefore not simply the organization of things. It is really the organization of knowledge. Um, Skill number two is archiving and records management. The next skill is archiving and records management. Libraries do not provide um, access to current information. They also um, provide memory. Access may contain letters, photographs, meetings, records, newspapers, manuscripts, oral history, maps, institutional documents, digital files, and objects connected to community history. The work really requires librarians to sit with archivists and determine what should be preserved and how material should be arranged, how they should be described, and how they can remain accessible over time. The responsibility has become more complicated in the digital environment. Um, a printed document may deteriorate physically. A digital document can disappear because the storage device fails, or a file format becomes obsolete, or a password is lost, or a platform shuts down. Um, there are just so many different reasons why a storage device can go flat or go blank. Um, Digital information can appear permanent while actually being remarkably fragile. Archival work, therefore, really involves more than placing old documents in protected boxes. It may include digitization, metadata creation, preservation planning, copyright review, migration between formats, and decisions about public access. Archivists and librarians uh, help really determine what future generations will be able to know about the present. And that's really a major and an enormous responsibility. The third skill is database management. Um, Many people believe that almost everything can be found through a basic internet search. Librarians, they understand that searchable does not always mean reliable or complete or appropriate or accessible. Libraries provide access to specialized databases containing scholarly articles, newspapers, historical records, legal material, business information, statistics, ebooks, streaming media, and other resources. The reference article specifically mentions platforms such as EBSCO or JSTOR and ProQuest as examples of databases that librarians may help patrons to use. Um, However, database knowledge means more than knowing where to click. Um, Librarians must understand search logic. They need to know how keywords, subject terms, filters, date ranges, publication types, Boolean operators, and citation trails can improve a search. They must also recognize when a database is not the right tool. Um, there's a lot of different places to jump from where a student might say, I cannot find anything about my topic. Um, and we know that as librarians that there's got to be something out there about the topic. So the librarian must determine whether the problem is the database, the search terms, the scope of the topic, the availability of research, or the student's understanding of the assignment. Um, Database searching is therefore partly technical and partly diagnostic, really. I mean, the librarian does not simply retrieve information. Um, the librarian really examines the information problem, um, and they will figure out, where in that problem, lies the issue to fix. Skill number 4, which is documentation. Documentation is another essential but often invisible skill. Librarians depend on accurate records. Um, these records, they may involve patron accounts, circulation activities, acquisitions, catalog changes, budgets, program attendance, equipment, room reservation, technology incidents, interlibrary loan, and statistical reports. Poor documentation creates really bad confusion. Um, the confusion that comes from this is just, it creates a calamity um, out of something that was minor. Um, it creates confusion. It can lead to duplicate work, lost materials, inaccurate reports, privacy problems, and interruption in service. Good documentation allows an organization to continue functioning when staff members are absent, um, responsibilities change, or new employees arrive. It also supports accountability. A librarian may need to explain how funds were spent, how frequently a service was used, why a collection decision was made, or what steps were taken to solve a problem. Um, Documentation is not glorious, and no one has ever produced a blockbuster action film called the Metadata Procedural Manual. Um, but institutions cannot function responsibly without it. Um, that's just kind of how it goes. Skill 5 is comp and technology skills. Technology proficiency has become central to librarianship. Um, Modern libraries, they really rely on integrated library systems, online catalogs, public computers, mobile devices, learning platforms, websites, digital repositories, productivity software, makerspace equipment, and communication tools. Um, the article notes that employers may look for familiarity with Office applications, email communication, and integrated library systems such as Koha and Evergreen. But knowing a particular program is only one part of the skill. Um, Technology, it does change very quickly. Um, it changes almost daily. Um, Softwares, they get updated. Interfaces, they get redesigned. Vendors, they change systems. New tools appear, old tools may disappear. Um, A librarian, therefore, needs to be able to technologically adapt um, to these new platforms and systems. The question is not simply, do you know the software? Um, the question is, or will be, um, can you learn a new system, understand how it supports library work, solve problems when it fails, and teach others to use it? So that's a real difference when it comes to evaluating and not evaluating. That distinction really matters. Libraries, they do not need employees who have memorized a few buttons. They need professionals who can understand the system. Um, Artificial intelligence makes this skill even more important. Um, it's patrons and students really, they're already using generative AI to search, write, summarize, create images, and answer questions. Librarians must be prepared to discuss what these tools can do, where they may fail, and what information that they may collect, how their output should be evaluated, and when their use may be inappropriate. So there's a lot of different areas to hit here. The librarian does not need to become a software expert, but the librarian does need to know enough technologically to understand what's going on around him or her to remain a credible guide. So that's kind of important. Skill six, research. Research is one of the defining skills of librarianship. A stronger researcher does not more than locate the first available answer. The researcher defines the question, identifies possible sources, and searches systematically, compares evidence, evaluates authority, notices gaps, and documents the process. Um, it is emphasized that librarians help users formulate search queries and evaluate sources and their credibility and navigate both print and digital resources. Um, these abilities are increasingly important because information abundance can create the illusion of knowledge. Um, and a search engine can return millions of results in less than a second, but does that do anything? So that does not mean that a user understands the issue. Um, Speed is not the same as accuracy. So getting in the database and then actually doing it is different than speed. Um, Availability is not the same as authority, and popularity is not the same as truth by any means. I think that the librarian helps people slow down long enough to ask better questions. And I think that they have certain questions that they need to always be asking, like who created this information, what evidence supports it, um, when was it published? Um, there's, has it really been updated? Um, there's a whole lot of things that there for you to keep in your mind when you are thinking about um, using these sources. Um, and so, uh, you know, you really want to just make sure that the source is informing, persuading, selling, or manipulating you. You want to make sure that it's doing the right thing. And the questions belong at the center of education and citizenship. Skill number 7 is teaching. Teaching may be one of the most underestimated librarian skills. Um, Librarians teach every day. They teach students how to develop research um, and research questions. They teach patrons how to use databases. They teach children how to explore stories. They teach adults how to navigate digital services. They teach workshops and tutorials and research guides and demonstrations and individualized learning experiences. Um, the article describes teaching as a significant librarian skill because librarians guide people in using digital tools, navigating resources, and locating relevant information. Um, it also emphasizes the importance of making complex information understandable to different audiences. This is where professional knowledge meets instructional ability. Knowing how to use a database does not automatically mean someone knows how to teach it. The librarian must understand the learner and what does this person already know. Um, what is causing confusion, possibly. Um, how much information can a person really absorb at one time? Um, so there's a whole bunch of questions um, that come to my mind when I think about running these classes. Um, that's kind of how I keep them in my mind. You could offer demonstrations or printed guides, but I don't know. Um, the learner practice independently. That would be up to you guys. The best librarian does not simply complete the task for the patient. How we know that um, we want to try to not steer clear of that. Actually, you know what? We need to show patrons if there is a way of doing something that's easier, then do it, as opposed to struggling for hours and not knowing how to find anything. So I think that librarians should help and should um, be there for their patrons. And this is the difference between providing an answer and building independence. Communicators, they listen before answering. They move into interpersonal skills, beginning with communication. So librarians, they communicate with children, teenagers, parents, teachers, faculty members, researchers, administrators, job seekers, community organizations, government agencies, vendors, and colleagues. Each group communicates differently. A librarian must adjust explanations without being condescending. The librarian must be clear without overwhelming the listener. And most importantly, librarians, they must listen. Um, that's probably the most important tool. A patron's first question is not always the real question. Um, Someone may ask, where are your medical books? And after a brief conversation, the librarian may learn that a person is trying to understand a recent diagnosis, and they, are looking for a specific topic, not just a very broad, okay, go here. Um, a student may ask, where can I find an article? The real problem may be that the student does not understand the assignment. A job seeker may ask to use a computer. The person may actually need help creating an email, completing an online application, or uploading a resume. Good reference service begins with careful listening, and the librarian must clarify without interrogating and assisting without judging. Um, so I think that here is where I'm going to wrap it up. I think that you guys have a good understanding of the picture of some of the things that librarians are going to need um, when they start working, and you develop these skills with time. They always come into play. So it's nothing to worry about. Um, if you have any questions, please email me, and that'll be all. Have a good day. Talk to you soon. Bye.